So today is chapter 14, the wisdom in the triangles, the Buddha. The Buddha of the present time is Lord Gautama, who took his last birth in India about 2,500 years ago, so a few years before Joshua ben Joseph showed up on the planet. And in that incarnation finished his series of lives as a Bodhisattva and succeeded the previous Buddha Kasyapa as head of the second ray in the occult hierarchy of our globe. His life as Siddhartha Gautama has been wonderfully told by Sir Edwin Arnold, and he wrote a book called Light of Asia, one of the most beautiful and inspiring poems in our language. 7 Buddhas appeared in succession during the world period, so there's 7 different Buddhas. We only know of one. One for each race. Each in turn takes charge of a special work in the second ray for the whole world, devoting himself to that part of it which lies in the higher worlds, while he entrusts his assistants and representatives, the Bodhisattva, the office of world teacher for the lower planes. From one who attains this positive oriental writer, think no praise too high, no devotion too deep. And just as we regard those masters to whom we look up as all but divine in goodness and wisdom, so to an even greater degree do they regard the Buddha. Our present Buddha was the first of our humanity to attain that stupendous height. The previous Buddhas have been the product of other evolutions, and a very special effort was needed on his part to prepare himself for this lofty post, an effort so stupendous that it is spoken of constantly by the Buddhists as the Mahadhinishkarmana, the great sacrifice, because he sat under a tree for 5 years after he tried all kinds of things and he figured it out. Many thousands of years ago, there arose a need for one of the adepts to become the world teacher for the 4th root race, for the time had come when humanity should be able to supply its own Buddhas up to the middle and 4th round of the 4th incarnation of our chain, which was exactly the central point of the scheme of evolution to which we belong. The great officer who were required, the Manus and the world teachers and others, were supplied to our humanity by more advanced humanities of other chains, which had made more progress, or perhaps were older than we, and we ourselves, having been thus assisted, shall in our turn have later on the privilege to make provisions for other and more backward schemes of evolution. So whoever's evolving now and gets into the 5th dimension, in the future, they will help other worlds that are very, very dark to go into the light. In such ways, the real brotherhood of all that lives is demonstrated, and we see that it is not merely a brotherhood of humanity or even of the life in this chain of worlds, but that all chains in the solar system mutually interact and help one another. I have no direct evidence that solar systems give assistance to each other in such way, but I should imagine it by analogy to be almost certain that even that is done. At least I have myself seen visitors from other systems, as I have said before, and have noticed that they are not merely traveling for pleasure, but are certainly in our system for some good purpose. What their purpose is, I do not know, but of course it is not my business. And that's where everybody's, ooh, aliens. Gotta grow up. Now, at this time in the remote past to which we have referred, humanity should have begun to provide its own teachers. But we are told that no one had quite reached the level required for the incurring of so tremendous a responsibility. The first fruits of humanity at this period were two brothers who stood equal in occult development, one being he whom we now call the Lord Buddha, the other our present world teacher, the Lord Maitreya. In what way they fell short of the required qualifications we do not know, but out of his great love for humanity, the Lord Gautama instantly offered to make himself ready to undertake whatever additional efforts might be necessary to attain the acquired development. We learn from tradition that life after life, he practices special virtues, each life showing out some great quality achieved. The great sacrifice of Buddha is spoken of in all the sacred books of Buddhists, but they have not understood the nature of his sacrifice. For many believe it to have been the descent of the Lord Buddha from nirvanic levels after his illumination to teach his law. So he taught his law. It is true that he did so descend, but that would not be anything in the nature of sacrifice. It would only be an ordinary, but not very pleasant piece of work. And that's where a lot of people are here finishing up karma, living really shitty lives, so they can be in the fifth dimension, so they can be in the future. So you need to learn how to enjoy your life and stop thinking you're wizards commanding and ordering the universe around. You need to change and stop all this silliness. It's your choice. The great sacrifice that he made was this spending of thousands of years in order to qualify himself to be the first of mankind who should help his brother men by teaching to them the wisdom which is life eternal. The work was done and nobly done. We know something of the various incarnations that he took after that as a Bodhisattva of his time, though there may be many more of which we know nothing. He appeared as Vyasa. He came to the ancient Egypts as Hermes, the thrice greatest. And Hermes did a lot of things. Who was called the father of all wisdom. He was the first of the 29 Zoroasters. So Hermes practiced Zoroastrian beliefs. The teacher of the religions of fire, and Zoroaster is all about fire. It's all about this ancient tree and this flame. Very, very old, very ancient. And there's a lot of people that still practice it. Still later, he walked among the Greeks as Orpheus, and he taught them by means of music and of song. And finally, he took his last birth in the north of India and wandered up and down the Ganges Valley for 45 years. So 40 years, that's what 5 times 40 is about 200, maybe more. Preaching his law and drawing around himself all those who in previous lives had been his pupils. In some way which we cannot hope yet to understand because of the great strain of those many ages of effort, there were certain points in the works of the Lord Buddha which it may be that he had not time to perfect utterly. It is impossible at such a level for there to be anything in the nature of a failure or a fault, but perhaps the strain of the past was too great even for such a power as his. We cannot know, but the fact remains that there were certain minor matters to which at the time he could not perfectly attend, and therefore the afterlife of the Lord Gautama was not quite the same as that of his predecessors. It is usual, as I had said, for the Bodhisattvas when he has lived his final life and becomes Buddha, when he has entered into glory, bearing his sheaves with him, as it is put in the Christian scriptures. to hand over his eternal works entirely to his successor and devote himself to his labors for humanity at higher levels, whatever may be these manifold activities of the Dhyan Buddha. They do not bring him again into birth on earth, but because of the particular circumstances surrounding the life of the Lord Gautama, two differences were made. Two supplementary acts were performed. And this is where people really confuse Buddhism, and there's so many kinds of sects and beliefs wrapped around all of it. The supplementary acts. The first was the sending of the Lord of the world, the great king of the one initiator of one of his three pupils, who were all lords of the flame from Venus, to take earthly incarnations almost immediately after the attainment of Buddhahood by the Lord Gautama, in order that by a very short life spent in traveling over India, he might establish therein certain centers of religious called mathas, Mathas. His name in the incarnation was Shankaracharya, I don't know, Shankaracharya. Not he who wrote the commentary, but the great founder of his line, who lived more than 2,000 years. Sri Shankara, whatever, found a certain school in Indian philosophy, revived Hinduism to a large extent, putting new life into its form and gathering together many of the teachings of the Buddha. Hinduism today, though in many ways it may fall short of its high ideal, is a very much more living faith than in the old days before the coming of Buddha, when it had degenerated into a system of formalism. Sri Shankara was also largely responsible for the disappearance of animal sacrifices, although such sacrifices are still offered in India, but are but few. Those are on the very small scale. Besides its teachings on the physical plane, Sri Shank accomplished certain occult works in connection with the higher planes of nature, which was of considerable importance to the later life of India. The second supplementary act to which I have referred above was undertaken by Lord Gautama himself, instead of devoting himself wholly to other and higher works. He has remained sufficiently in touch with his world to be reached by invocation of his successors when necessary, so that his advice and help can still be obtained in any great emergency. He also undertook a return to the world once each year on the anniversary of his death and shed upon it a flood of blessings. The Lord Buddha has his own special type of force which he outpours when he gives his blessings to the world, and this benediction is unique and very marvelous thing. For by his authority and position, a Buddha has access to planes of nature which are altogether beyond our reach. Hence he can transmute and draw down to our level the forces particular to those planes. Without this meditation of the Buddha, these forces would be of no use to us here in the physical life. Their vibrations are so tremendous, so incredibly rapid, that they would pass through us unsensed at any level we can reach, and we should never even know of their existence. But as it is, the force of the blessings is scattered all over the world, and it instantly finds for itself channels through which it can pour, just as water instantly finds an open pipe, thereby strengthening all good work and bringing peace to the hearts of those who are able to receive it. The occasion selected for this wonderful outpouring is the full moon day of the Indian month of Vaishakh, Vaisakh, called Ceylon Wesak, Ceylon, capital Wesak. So they do this in Europe, this ceremony on this moon. And I think there's other people around the world that also do it. And usually corresponding with the English May, so in May they do this ceremony. The anniversary of all the momentous occurrences of his last earthly life, his birth, his attainment of Buddhahood, and his departure from the physical body. In connection with this visit of his, and quite apart from the tremendous esoteric significance, the esoteric ceremony is performed on the physical plane, at which the Lord actually shows himself in the presence of crowds, ordinary pilgrims. Whether he shows himself to pilgrims, I am not certain. They all prostrate themselves at the moment when he appears. But that may be only an imitation of the prostrations of the adepts and their pupils, who do see the Lord Gautama. It seems probable that some at least of the pilgrims have seen him for themselves, for the existence of ceremony is widely known among the Buddhists of Central Asia. It is spoken of as the appearance of the shadow or reflection of the Buddha. The description given of it in such traditions accounts being as a rule fairly accurate. So far as we can see, there appears to be no reason why any person whatever who happens to be in the neighborhood at the time may not be present at the ceremony. No apparent effort is made to restrict the numbers of spectators, though it is true that one hears stories and parties of pilgrims who have wandered for years without being able to find the spot. All members of the Great White Brotherhood, except the king himself and his 3 disciples, usually attend the ceremony. There is no reason why any of our earnest theosophical members should not be present at it in their astral bodies. Thus, to whom the secret has been confided usually try so to arrange matters as to put their physical bodies to sleep an hour or so before the exact moment of full moon, to be undisturbed until about an hour after. So they go into some sort of deep meditation like sleeping. So they're in the spirit world and they're connecting all kinds of things. And it says the Valley of Wesak Festival. So this is a drawing of the Valley of the Wesak Festival. And like I say, over in Europe, they know about all of this. There's an altar and there's people facing it. There's a stupa. There's a stream that goes by. And it says the place selected is a small plateau surrounded by a low hill which lies on the north side of the Himalayas, not far from the frontier of Nepal and perhaps about 400 miles west of the city of Lhasa. This little plain is roughly oblong in shape, its length being perhaps 1.5 miles and its breadth rather less. The ground slopes slightly downwards from south to north. It is mostly bare and stony, though in some places covered with coarse, wiry grass and rough, scrubby vegetation. A stream runs down part of the west side of the plateau, crosses it in the northwest corner, and escapes about the middle of the north side through a pine-clothed ravine, eventually reaching a lake which is visible at a distance of some miles. The surrounding country seems wild and uninhabited. There are no buildings in sight except a single ruined stupa with 2 or 3 huts beside it. On the slope of one of the hills on the eastern side of the plain, about the center of the southern half of the plain, lies a huge block of grayish-white stone, veins with some glittering substance. An altar-like block, perhaps 12 feet in length by 6 feet wide, and standing about 3 feet out of the ground. On his materialization in the center of the circle, all the adepts and initiates bow gravely towards him. And another verse is chanted. After this still intoning verse, the inner rings divide into 8 parts, so as to form a cross within the outer circle. The Lord Maitreya still remaining at the center, and at the next moment of this stately ritual, the cross becomes a triangle. The Lord Maitreya moving forward so as to stand at its apex and therefore close to the altar stone. Upon the altar in the open space left in front of the golden bowl, the Lord Maitreya reverently lays the rod of power, while behind him the circle changes into a rather involved curved figure so that all are facing the altar. At the next change, the curved figure becomes a reverse triangle, so that we have a representation of the well-known sign of Theosophic Society. Though without encircling snake, this figure in turn resolves into a five-pointed star that Lord Maitreya, being still at the southern point nearest the altar stone, and other great officials or kohans at the fifth point where the lines intersect. A diagram of the symbolic figure is wherein appended, as some of them are not easily described. So there's a drawing here, I'll show it. So that's what it's talking about. When the seven and single stage is reached and chanting ceases, and after a few moments of solemn silence, Lord Maitreya, again taking the rod of power into his hand and raising it above his head, utters in a few ceremonious words of Pali, "All is ready, Master, come." Then as he again lays down the fury rod, in the exact moment of the full moon, the Lord Buddha appears as a gigantic figure floating in the air just above the southern hill. The members of the Brotherhood bow with joined hands, and the multitude behind them fall on their face and remain prostrate, while the others sing the three verses which were taught by Lord Buddha himself during his earth life to the schoolboy Chara. The Lord Buddha, the sage of the Sakyas, is among mankind the best teacher. He has done that which was to be done, has crossed to the other shore, nirvana. He is filled with strength and energy. Him and the blessed ones I take for my guide. The truth is non-material. It brings freedom from passion, desire, and sorrow. It is free from all stain. It is sweet, plain, and logic. This truth I take as my guide. Whatever is given to the 8 kinds of noble ones, who in pairs from the 4 grades, who know the truth, verily brings great reward. This brotherhood of the noble ones I take as my guide. And then it says the greatest blessing. Then the people raise and stand gazing at the presence of the Lord, while the brotherhood chants for the benefit of the people's noble words of the, I don't know how to say this word, Mahamangala, Sutta, Sutta, which has been translated thus to Professor Ree David's. Certain slight modifications have been introduced from other sources when they seem decided improvements. It says, when yearning for good, many devas and men have held drivers things to be blessed. Sorry, I think, yeah, that's a D. Okay, do it over again. When the yearning for good, many devas and men have held diver things to be blessings. Do thou then inform us, O Master, what is the greatest blessing? Not to serve the foolish, but to serve the wise. To honor those worthy of honor, this is the greatest blessing. To dwell in the pleasant land, to have done good deeds in a former birth, to have a soul filled with right desire, this is the greatest blessing. Much insight and much education, self-control and a well-trained mind, peasant words that are well spoken, this is the greatest blessing. To support father and mother, to cherish wife and child, to follow a peaceful calling, this is the greatest blessing. to bestow alms and live righteously, to give help to one's kindred, to do deeds which cannot be blamed. This is the greatest blessing. To adore and cease from sin. Abhor, A-B-H-O-R, abhor, and cease from sin. To sustain from strong drink, so no alcohol. Not to be weary in well-doing, this is the greatest blessing. Reverence and lowliness, contempt and gratitude, the hearing of the law that due seasons, this is the greatest blessing. To be long-suffering and meek, to associate with tranquility, religion talk at due season, this is the greatest blessing. Self-restraint and purity, the knowledge of the four great truths, the realization of nirvana, this is the greatest blessing. Beneath the stork of life's changes, the soul that stands unshaken, passionless, unsorrowing, secure, this is the greatest blessing. Invisible on every side is he who acteth thus. On every side he walks in safety, and his is the greatest blessing. Quite a long one. The figure which floats above the hill is an enormous size, but actually reproduces a form or feature of the body in which the Lord last lived on earth. He appears seated cross-legged and hands together, dressed in the yellow robes of the Buddhist monk, but wearing it so as to leave the right arm bare. No description can give an idea of the face, a face truly godlike, for it combines calmness and power, wisdom and love, in an expression containing all that our minds can imagine of the divine. We may say that the complexion is clear yellowish white, and the features clearly cut, for the forehead is broad and noble, the eyes large, illuminous of all the deep dark blue, the nose slightly eloquent, the lips red and firmly set, but all this puts before us merely the outer masks and gives but a little grasp of the living whole. The hair is black, almost blue-black and wavy. Curiously, it is neither worn long according to Indian custom, nor shaved altogether in the manner of Oriental monks, but is cut off just before it reaches the shoulder, parted in the center, swept back from the forehead. The story is told that when the Prince Siddhartha left home to seek the truth, he seized his long hair and cut it off close above his head with a sweep of the sword, and that ever after he kept it at the same length. One of the most striking features of this wondrous apparition is the splendid aura which surrounds the figure. It falls into concentric spheres, as do the auras of all highly advanced men. Its general plan is the same as that of the Arhat depicted in plate XXV1 in Man Visible and Invisible. So that's another book, Man Visible and Invisible. But the arrangement of the color is unique. The figure is englobed in a light which is somehow at the same time dazzling and yet transparent, so bright that the eyes can hardly rest upon it, and yet through it the face and the colors of the robe stand out with perfect clearness. Outside of that comes a ring of glorious ultramarine, then in succession glowing golden yellow, the richest crimson, pure silver white, and a magnificent scarlet. All these being, of course, really spheres, those showing as bands when seen against the sky, shooting out at the right angle. Outside all these are rays of all these hues intermingled and inspired with flash of green and violet, as will be observed when we refer to our frontier pieces. These colors in exactly this order are described in ancient Buddhist scriptures as constituting the aura of the Lord, when in 1885 it was thought desirable that a special flag should be found for the Buddhists of Ceylon. Our president founder, Colonel Okot, in consultation with our Sinhalas brothers of Colombia, evolved the idea that utilizing for that purpose that same significance, grouping the colors, the Kano tells us, Old Diary Leaves, volume 111, page 352, that he learned some years later from the Tibetan ambassador to the Viceroy of India, whom he met at Darjeeling, that the colors are the same as those in the flag of the Dalai Lama. The idea of this symbolic standard seems to have been widely accepted. I have myself seen it in Buddhist temples at places as far apart as Rangoon and Sacramento in California. Through a most unfortunate mistake, these bands of colors were given in a wrong order in the plate accompanying the first edition of this book. The error has now been corrected. It is, of course, impossible to obtain in a printed illustration any approach to the brilliance and the purity of the colors as seen in the sky. All we can do is offer a suggestion to help the imagination of the reader. In the early books, we have described scarlet in man's aura as expressing anger only. So it does in ordinary lower astrals, but quite apart from this, we find that the higher levels are far more magnificent and luminescent scarlet, the very essence of living flame betoken in presence of the dauntless courage and the high determination. It is, of course, as denoting in the possession of these qualities in the superlative degrees that it appears in the aura of the Lord Buddha. We might conjecture that the somewhat unusual prominence of this brilliant scarlet band may be significant of the special manifestations of these qualities in that age-long work of self-development to which I have referred on page 298. The Lord Maitreya, who takes so permanent a part in the ceremony, will in due course of time succeed to the office now held by the Lord Gautama. It will perhaps be of interest to compare his aura with that which we have just described. The easiest way to imagine it is to look at the illustration of the aura of the Adart, and then it talks about plate, the invisible man, and invisible, and then modify it in the imagination as here indicated. It has a general resemblance to that, but besides being so much larger, the colors are somewhat differently arranged. The heart of it is blinding white, just as the case of the Adart or Arhat. Then, eliminating the yellow from that part, let the rose color oval retain its present position, but extend inwards up to the edge of the white. Outside that rose color oval, put a band of yellow instead of blue. Outside the green comes a belt of blue, outside that the violet, as in the book, but outside of the violet again a broad band of the most glorious pale rose, into which the violet imperceptibility melts. Outside of all comes the radiant of mixed colors, just as in the book. The rays of white light flash through it in the same way, yet even they seem faintly tinged with the ever-present pale rose. The whole aura gives the impression of being infused with the most delicate yet glowing rose, much as in the man invisible and invisible. A point which seems worthy to notice is that the aura and the color come exactly the same order as a solar spectrum. Through orange and indigo are emitted first the rose, which is the form of red, then the yellow, shading into green, blue, violet in succession. And then it goes on into ultraviolet, melting into rose, the spectrums beginning again in the higher octaves, just as the lowest astral follows upon the highest physical. Of course, that is very poor description, but it seems the best that we can do. It must be understood that it exists in many more dimensions than we can anyhow represent. In order to say thus much about it, I have tried to do something nearly equivalent to taking three-dimensional sections of it. So I was talking about the rainbow and the colors. But it is wise for us to remember that it is by no means impossible that another section might be taken in a slightly different manner, which would yield somewhat similar results and yet be quite as true. It is hopeless to try to explain on the physical plane the realities of the higher worlds. When Mahamangala Sutta is finished, the Lord Maitreya takes a golden bowl of water from the altar stone and holds it above his head for the few moments, while a multitude behind, who have also provided themselves with vessels filled with water, follow his example. As he replaces it on the altar stone, another verse is chanted. He is the Lord, the saint, who is perfect in knowledge, who possesses the 8 kinds of knowledge, and has accomplished the 15 holy practices, who has come the good journey which led to the Buddhahood, who knows the third world, and unrivaled the teachers of gods and men, and blessed one, the Lord Buddha. As this ends, a smile of ineffable love beams forth from his face of the Lord as he raises his right hand in the attitude of benediction. While a great shower of flowers fall among the people, again the members of the Brotherhood bow, again the crowd prostrates itself, and the figure slowly fades out of the sky, while the multitude relieves itself in shouts of joy and praise. The members of the Brotherhood come up to the Lord Maitreya in order of their admission, and each sip the water in the golden bowl, and the people also sip theirs, taking the remainder home in their quaint leather bottles as holy water, to drive away all evil influences from their house, or perhaps to cure the sick. Then the vast company breaks up with mutual congratulations, and people bear away to their far distant homes an ineffable memory of the wonderful ceremonies in which they have taken part. So the predecessors of the Buddha. So they're going to talk about the ones before that. Okay. An interesting glimpse of the predecessors of Buddha is to be found in the vision of St. John the Divine. And round about the throne were 24 seats. Upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold. He who is privileged to see this and remember it will come to everyone someday, does so from a special point of view of his own beliefs. Therefore, St. John, so that he saw what he expected to see, the 24 elders of the Jewish tradition. The number 24 marks the date at which this vision was first seen, or rather the date at which the Jewish idea of that glory was formulated. If we now could raise ourselves into the Spirit and could see that ineffable glory, we should see 25, not 24 elders. For there has been one Lord Buddha who has attained since the vision was crystallized in the Jewish scheme of the higher thought. For those elders are the great teachers who have taught the world in this hour round. There are 7 Buddhahoods of each world that make 21. For the 3 worlds which we have passed, and the Lord Gautama was the 4th and the Buddha of this world. Therefore 24 were the elders in those old days, but they would be 25 if we could see them now. So this is where, like I say, things get distorted. And finding the answers and truths is important. The Christian Church has translated that somewhat differently, taking these elders as the 12 apostles and the 12 Jewish prophets. If those 24 were the apostles and the prophets, the seers must have seen himself among the rest. which would surely have been mentioned. Those elders had on their heads crowns of gold, it is said. And a little later on, we read that they cast their crowns before him, as we sing in the Glorious Trinity hymn. I remember that as a child I marveled much how that could be. It seems a strange thing that these men could constantly cast down those crowns and still have crowns to cast. I could not understand it, and I wonder what schemes there was for the returning of the crowns to their heads, so that they could cast them down again. Such faintly ridiculous ideas are perhaps not unnatural in a child, but they disappear when one understands. If we have seen the image of Lord Buddha, we must have noticed that out of the crown of the head there usually comes a little mound or cone. It is as a crown, gold in color, which represents the outpouring spiritual forces from what is called the Sahasrara chakra, or crown chakra, the center of the top of a man's head, the thousand-petal lotus, as it is poetically called in the Oriental books. The chakras. And so on the head, you'll see spiritual people, you'll see like that bump, and you'll see all these little spinning circles on a person's head, and you'll see that little golden light. In the slightest developed man, that center pours out splendor and glory that makes for him the vertical crown, and the meaning of the passage is that all that he has developed, all the splendid karma that he makes, all the glorious spiritual forces that he generates, all that he casts perpetually at the feet of the Logos to be used in his work. So over and over again can he continue to cast down his golden crown, because it perpetually reforms as a force of wells up from within him. So if you're really, really a master in that, you're going to see these things. Nobody can fool. I don't care what you practice. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what you teach. When I look at people, I know exactly if they're really, really teaching light or anything like that. And you can't create this. And this is where you have to learn how to open your third eye and see everybody's energy. And you have to honor that. And people try to tear mine apart. People try to get in my third eye, my crown chakra. I met people 7 years ago that tried to tear my whole energy level apart, everything apart, steal and destroy everything. I spent my lifetime reading, searching, practicing, and studying. I didn't go and rip it out as somebody else. I had to live my nightmares to become who I am. And you can see that in my energetic fields. And this is where you can feel and see when people come on my site. You can feel the energy drop. Then they go into their altered states, and then they start tearing everybody's energy apart. That's not spiritual. They're not even teachers. They have lots to learn. It's their karma. The Bodhisattva Maitreya. The Lord Maitreya, whose name means kindliness or compassion, took up the office of Bodhisattvas when the Lord Gautama laid down, and since then he has made many efforts for the promotion of religion. One of his first steps on assuming office was to take advantage of the tremendous magnetism generated in the world by the presence of the Buddha, to arrange that great teachers should simultaneously appear in many different parts of the earth, so that within the comparative short space of time we find not only the Buddha himself, Sri Shankaracharya Mahavira in India, but also Mithra in Persia, Lao-Tzu and Confucian in China, Pythagoras in ancient Greek. So these guys were all on the planet, all trying to help everybody to learn and evolve. And this is where when you read these books, don't play around with it. People think they can just find books and that and then make people believe stuff. Like I say, you generate an energy. These spirits are attached to these books. You can't fool them. They don't like when people misuse their knowledge. Twice he has himself appeared, the Krishna in the Indian plains and as Christ amid the hills of Palestine. In the incarnation as Krishna, the great feature was always love. The child Krishna drew around him people who felt for him the deepest, the most intense affection. Again, in his birth in Palestine, love was the center feature of his teachings. He said, "This new commandment I give unto you, and ye love one another as I have loved you." He asked that his disciples might all be one in him, even as he was one with the Father. His closest disciple, St. John, insisted most strongly upon the same idea. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. What is now called Christianity was undoubtedly a magnificent conception as he originally taught it. Sadly, it has fallen away from the high levels in the hands of ignorant exponents since. It must not be assumed, of course, that the teachings of brotherly and neighborly love was new in the world, as St. Augustine said in the book De Civitate Dei. So that's a book again. The identical thing that we now call the Christian religion existed among the ancients, has not been lacking from the beginning of the human race until the coming of Christ in the flesh, from which moment on the true religion, which already existed, began to be called Christian. And that's where I always say Joshua ben Joseph was a pagan. He didn't follow the Jewish stuff. He brought in new things. They killed him on the cross. And 300 years later, they called it Christianity and told everybody to wear this thing with a dead, dying man in agony, and they called it Christianity. And they brought it down from what he did, what he brought into the world. And he was a pagan. Don't say he was a Christian, because he wasn't. It didn't come up until 300 years later. The identical thing that we now call Christian religion existed among the ancients and has not been lacking from the beginning of the human race until the coming of the Christ in flesh, from which moment on the true religion, which already existed, began to be called Christian. Readers of the Bhagavad Gita will also remember that the teachings of love and devotion with which is filled, the Bodhisattva also occupied occasions and bodies of the Tsongkhapa, the great Tibetan religious reformer. And throughout the centuries, he has sent forth a stream of his pupils, including Nagarjuna, Asar Sangha, this one, Ramanu Jacharya, Madhava Chakarya, and many others who found new sects or threw new lights upon the mysteries of religion. Among these was one of his pupils who was sent and found the Mahatmada or Mahatmadan faith. The sending out of the teachers I have mentioned above is only the part of his work which is not confined to humanity, but includes the education of all creatures on earth, and among them the Deva evolution. He is thus the head of all the faiths at present existing. So all faiths and beliefs on this planet come from there. Thus he is the head of all faiths at present existing, and many others which have died out in the course of time, though he is of course responsible for them only in their original form, and not for the corruption which man has naturally and inevitably introduced into all of them as the ages have rolled by. He varies the types of religion to suit the periods of the world history at which it is put forth, and the people to whom it is given. But though the form may vary as evolution proceeds, the ethics are ever the same. He will come to earth many times more during the periods of the root races, founding many such religions, and each time drawing himself around himself such men of that race are prepared to follow him. From among those numbers he chooses some whom he can draw into closer relation with himself. Some who are pupils in the innermost sense, then towards the end of the race, when it is already far past its prime, a new race is beginning to dominate the world. This is where we're going into the age of Aquarius. All these children being born are the new race. When it is already far past its prime, the new race is beginning to dominate the world. He will arrange that all his special pupils who have followed him in thus previous incarnations shall come to birth together at the time of his last life on the world. In it, he will attain the great initiation of the Buddha and thus gain perfect enlightenment. At that time, these pupils of his, without physically knowing or remembering him, will all be strongly attracted towards him. Under his influence, great numbers of them will enter the path, and many will advance to tile higher stages, having already in previous incarnations made considerable progress. We thought at first that the accounts given in the Buddhist books of the large numbers of men who instantly attained the Arhat levels when the Lord Gautama became the Buddha were beyond the bounds of possibility. But we found on closer examination that there was truth underlying those accounts. It is possible that the numbers were exaggerated, but that very many pupils did suddenly attain their higher degrees of initiation under the impetus given by the mighty magnetism and power of the Buddha is undoubtedly the fact. The Asala Festival, Asala. Beside the great Wesak festival, there is one other occasion in the year when a number of the Brotherhood all meet together officially. The meeting in this case is usually held in a private house of Lord Maitreya, situated in the Himalayas, but on the southern instead of the northern slopes. On this occasion, no pilgrim on the physical plane are present, but all astral visitors who know of the celebration are welcome to attend it. It is held on the full moon day, the month of Asala, the Sanskrit Asadha, usually corresponding with the English July. It is the anniversary and delivery of the Lord Buddha of his first announcements of the great discovery. The sermon which he preached to his 5 disciples, commonly known, I'm not even going to try to say this, Dhammachakkappattana Sutta, which has been poetically translated by Ra David's The Setting in Motion of the Royal Chariot Wheel of the Kingdom of Righteousness. And that's a book. It is often more briefly described in Buddhist books as the turning of the wheel of law. And that's where the Buddhists, they do the turning of the wheel, because inside it is this prayer. It explains for the first time the 4 noble truths and the noble Eightfold path, expounding the great middle way of Buddha, the life of perfect righteousness in the world, which lies midway between the exaggerance of asceticism on the one hand, the carelessness of mere worldly life on the other. In his love for his great predecessors, Lord Maitreya has ordained that wherever the anniversary of that first preaching comes around, and the same sermon shall be recited once more in the presence of the assembly of the Brotherhood. And he usually added to it a simple address of his own, expounding and applying it. The recitation of the sermon commences at the moment of full moon, and the readings of the address are usually over in about a half hour. The Lord Maitreya generally takes his place upon the marble seat which is set at the edge of the raised terrace in the lovely garden just in front of his house. The greatest of officials sit close by him, while the rest of the Brotherhood is grouped in the garden a few feet below. On this occasion, as on the others, there is often an opportunity for pleasant converse, and kindly greetings and benedictions are distributed to the masters among the pupils and those who aspire to their pupils. It may be useful to give some account of the ceremony of what is usually said to these festivals, though it is, of course, utterly impossible to reproduce the wonder and the beauty and the eloquence of the words of the Lord Maitreya on such occasions. The account which follows does not attempt to report any single discourse. It is a combination of, I fear, very imperfectly remembered fragments, some of which have already appeared elsewhere, but it will give to those who have not previously heard of it some idea of the line generally taken. The great sermon is wonderfully simple, and its points are repeated over and over again. There are no shorthands in those days, so that it might be taken down and read by everyone afterwards. His disciple had remembered his words by the impressions made on them at the time. So he made them simple, and he repeated them again and again like a refrain, so that the people might be sure of them. One may readily see in the reading it that is constructed for that purpose, that it may be easily remembered. Its points are arranged categorically so that when it has once been heard, each point reminds one of the next, as though it were a kind of mnemonic. And to the Buddhist, each of these separate and easily remembered words suggest a whole body of related ideas, so that the sermon, short and simple as it is, contains an explanation and the rule of life. One might well think that all that can be said about the sermon has been said already many times over, yet the Lord, with his wonderful eloquence and the way in which he puts it, makes it every year seem nothing new, and each person feels its message as though it were especially addressed to himself. On the occasion, as in the original preaching, the Pentecostal miracle repeats itself. The Lord speaks in the original Saronis Pali, but everyone present hears him in his own tongue wherein he was born, as is said in the Acts of the Apostle. The Four Noble Truths. The sermon begins with a proclamation, and middle path is the safest and indeed the only true path. To plunge on the one hand into the sensual excesses of pleasure of the ordinary worldly life in means of degrading and leads a man no whither. On the other hand, extravagant asceticism is also evil and useless. So if you go way over to perversion with sexuality, or you go way over in asceticism, either one can be very negative. So Buddha found the middle path. So, on the other hand, extravagant asceticism is also evil and useless. There may be a few to whom the high aesthetics and solitary life appeals, and they may be capable of leading it rightly, though even then it must be carried to excess. But for all ordinary people, the middle way of a good life lived in the world is in every way best and safest. The first step towards leading of such a life is to understand its conditions, and the Lord Buddha lays these down for us in what he has called the Four Noble Truths. These are sorrow or suffering, the cause of sorrow, the ceasing of sorrow or the escape from sorrow, the way which leads to the escape escape from sorrow. The first truth is an assertion that all manifest life is sorrow, unless man knows how to live it. In commenting upon this, the Bodhisattva said that there are two senses in which manifest life is sorrowful. One of these is to some extent inevitable, but the other is an entire mistake and is very easily to be avoided. To the monad, who is the true spirit of man, all manifestation life is in one sense a sorrow, because it is limitation, a limitation which we in our physical brain cannot in the least conceive, because we have no idea of the glorious freedom of the higher life. In exactly the same sense, it has always been said that Christ offers himself as a sacrifice when he descended into matter. It is a sacrifice undoubtedly, but it is an expressionally great limitations, for it shuts off from him all the glorious powers which are his own, his own level. The same is true of the monad of man. He undoubtedly makes a great sacrifice when he brings himself into connection with the lower matter, when he hovers over it through the long ages of its development up to the human level, when he puts down the tiny fragments of himself, a fingertip as it were, and thereby make an ego or individual soul. Even though we may be only a tiny fragment, indeed the fragment of a fragment, we are nevertheless a part of a magnificent reality. There is nothing to be proud of in being only a fragment, but there is a certainty to become. We are therefore part of the higher. We can eventually raise into the higher and become one therewith. This is the end of the aim of our evolution. That's why everything's about evolution. And even when we attain that, remember that it is not for the sake of our delight in the advancement, but that we may be able to help in the scheme. All these sacrifices and limitations may rightly be described as involving suffering, but they are undertaken gladly as soon as the ego fully understands. An ego has not the perfection of the monad, and so he does not fully understand the first. He has to learn, like everybody else, that quite tremendous limitations at each further descent into matter is an unavoidable fact. So there is that much of suffering inseparable from manifestations. We have to accept the limitations as a means to an end, as part of the divine scheme. There is another sense in which life is often sorrow, but a kind of sorrow that can be entirely avoided. A man who lives the ordinary life of the world often finds himself in trouble of various kinds. What would not be true to say that he is always in sorrow, but he is often in anxiety, and he is always liable at any moment to fall into great sorrow or anxiety. The reason for this is that he is full of lower desires of various kinds, not at all necessary wicked, but desires for lower things. And because of these desires, he is tied down and confined. He is constantly striving to attain something he has not, and he is full of anxiety as to whether he will attain it. When he has attained it, he is anxious lest he should lose it. This is true not only of money, but the position and power, of fame and social advancement. All these cravings cause insistent trouble in many different areas. It is not only the individual anxiety of the man who has or has not some subject of general desire. We have also to take into account all the envy and jealousy and ill feelings caused in the hearts of others who are striving for the same object. There are other objects of desire which seem higher than these and yet are not the highest. How often, for example, a young man desires affection from someone who cannot give it to him, who has it not to give. For such a desire as that comes often a great deal of sadness, jealousy, and much other ill feelings. You will say that such a desire is natural. Undoubtedly it is. The affection which is returned is a great source of happiness. Yet if it cannot be returned, a man should have the strength to accept the situation and not allow sorrow to be caused by the unsatisfied desire. When we say that the thing is natural, we mean that it is what we might accept from the average man. But the student of occultism must try to raise somewhat above the level of the average man. Otherwise, how can he help that man? We must raise above the level in order that we may be able to reach down a helping hand. We must aim not at the natural in the sense of the average, but at the supernatural. One who is clairvoyant will readily subscribe to the truth of this great teachings of Buddha, that on the whole life of sorrow, for if he looks at the astral and mental body of those whom he meets, he will see that they are filled with a vast number of small vortices, all whirling rigorously, representing all sort of odd little thoughts, little anxieties, little troubles about one thing or another. All these cause disturbances and sufferings, and what is needed most of all for progress is serenity. The only way to gain peace is to get rid of them altogether and bring us to our second noble truth, the cause of sorrow. We have already seen the cause of sorrow is always desire. If a man has no desire, if he is not striving for place or power or wealth, then he is equally tranquil whether the wealth or position comes or whether it goes. He remains unruffled and serene because he does not care. Human beings will, of course, wish for this or that, but always mildly and gently so that he does not allow himself to be disturbed. We know, for example, how often people are prostrated with sorrow when they lose those whom they love by death. But if their affection be at the higher level, if they love their friend and not their bodies of their friends, there can be no sense of separation and therefore no sorrow. If they are filled with desire for bodily contact with a friend on the physical plane, then at once that desire will cause sadness. But if they will put aside the desire and live in the continuum of the higher life, the mourning passes away. Sometimes people grieve when they find old age coming upon them, when they find their vehicle not so strong as they used to be. They desire the strength and the faculties that they once had. It is wise for them to repress that desire, to realize that their bodies have done good work. If they can no longer do the same amount as of yore, they should do gently and peacefully what they can, but not worry themselves over the change. Presently they will have new bodies, and the way to ensure a good vehicle is to make sure use as one can the old one, but in any case to be serene and calm and unruffled. The only way to do that is forget self, to let all self-desire cease and to turn the thought outwards to helping of others as far as one's capability go. The ceasing sorrow, already we see how grief ceases and how calm to be attained. It is by always keeping the thought on the highest things we have still to live in this world, which has been poetically described as a sorrowful star, as indeed it is for many, so many. Perhaps for most people, though, it need not be, yet we may live in it quite happily if we are not attached to it by desire. We are in it, but we must not be of it, at least not to such an extent as to let cause worry and trouble or vexation. Undoubtedly, our duty is to help others in their afflictions and troubles and worries. But in order to do that effectively, we must have none of our own. We must let those ruffles which might cause them slip smoothly past us, leaving us calm and content. If we take this lower life with philosophy, we shall find that for us sadness almost entirely ceases. There may be some who think such an attitude unattained is not so, for if it were, the Lord Buddha would never have prescribed it for us. We can all reach it. We ought to do so because only when we have attained it can we really and effectively help our brother men. And that's where you bless people. You bless them to be successful. You find a way to help them and pay them back and do whatever you can. When people have done good for me in my life in different places, I've tried very hard to find a way to help them. All the elders and people that I've met along my path. But I've met a lot of people who were envious and jealous and did the opposite. And they need to own up to it because they created karma. They know what they have done. They can't run from it. They can't hide from it. That's going to create anxiety, stress, worry, fear, everything. And that's where if I make mistakes, I got to tell the universe, look, I messed up. People pray for me to show up. People see me in dreams years before I show up. And then they see me and they go, oh, I want everything of his. I'm going to destroy him. I'm going to show the universe I'm a god. And I'm going to float in the air with all kinds of things. And everybody's going to bow to me. Can't do that to people. You always have to right your wrong, whether you like it or not. That's what karma is. It's a teacher. And it will catch you in lifetime after lifetime. It's not just this one. The Noble Eightfold Path, the way which leads to escape from sorrow, this is given to us in what is called the Noble Eightfold Path, another of Lord Buddha's wonderful tabulations or categories. It is a very beautiful statement because it can be taken at all levels. The man in the world, even the uneducated man, can take it in the lowest aspects and find a way to peace and comfort through it. Yet the highest philosophers may also take it and interpret it at his level and learn very much from it. The first step in this path is right belief. Some people object to that qualification. So the Eightfold Path, the way which leads to the escape from sorrow, the given to us in the called the Noble Eightfold Path, another of Lord Buddha's wonderful tabulations and categories. It is a very beautiful statement because it can be taken at all levels. A man in the world, even the uneducated man, can take it in his lowest aspects and find a way to peace and comfort through it. Yet the highest philosophers may also take it and interpret it at his level and learn very much from it. The first step in that path is right belief. Some people object to that qualification because they say it demands from them something in the nature of blind faith. It is not at all the sort of belief which is required. It is rather a demand for a certain amount of knowledge. And that's why I say you got to get a lot of knowledge up here. Really lots of knowledge on all kinds of spiritual beliefs and things. And if you don't do that, then you're just fooling yourself. As to the ruling factors in life, it demands that we shall understand a little of the divine scheme as far as it applies to us. If we cannot yet see that for ourselves, that we should accept it as it is always put before us. Certain broad facts are always put before men in some form or another. They are explained even to the savage tribes by their medicine men, and to the rest of mankind by various religious teachers in all kinds of scriptures. It is very true that scriptures and religion differ, but the point in which they all agree have to be accepted by a man before he can understand life sufficiently to live happy. That's why you gotta search all beliefs and find that core truth that's there in every culture. And going back millions of years, there's all kinds of practices that have been on the earth that all understood this. One of these facts is the eternal law of cause and effect. If a man lives under the delusion that he can do anything that he likes, and that the effects of his action will never recoil upon himself, he will most certainly find that some of these actions eventually involved him in unhappiness and suffering. If again he does not understand that the object of his life is progress, that God's will for him is that he shall grow to be something better and nobler than he is now, then also he will bring unhappiness and suffering upon himself, because he will be likely to live for a lower side of life only. The lower side of life never finally satisfies the inner man. And so it comes about that he must at least know something of these great laws of nature. And if he cannot yet know them for himself, it will be well for him to believe them. Later on, at a higher level, before the second initiation can be attained, we are told that we must kill out all doubts. So you have to really figure out your doubts and everything. When the Lord Buddha was asked whether this meant that we must accept some form of belief blindly, he replied, no, but you must know yourself three great things: that only upon the path of holiness and good living can a man finally attain perfection, and that in order to attain it, he must through many lives gradually raise higher and higher. That's what karma is about. That's why the wheel of karma, you keep rising till you get to there. You don't try to deceive or do anything, because that just brings you down. and it causes you way longer to get to this point. So rising higher and higher, and there is a law of eternal justice under which all these things work. At this stage, a man must cast out all doubt, must be thoroughly and inwardly convinced that these things, but for the man of the world, it is well that he should at least believe that much, because unless he has that as a guide in life, he cannot get any further. The second step of the Noble Eight Path is right thought. Now, right thought means two separate things. The first demands that we should think about right things and not about wrong things. This is where I say right, like when I say feng shui, there's a right way of doing it and a wrong way. So I say a right way and a wrong way. Same with Kabbalah and all. There's a right way and a wrong way to everything. We can have at the back of our minds always high and beautiful thoughts, or on the other hand, those minds may be filled with thoughts of common everyday matter. Let there be no mistake here. Whatever work we are doing should be done thoroughly and earnestly, and with whatever concentration of thought upon it is necessary for the perfection. But most people, even when their work is done, or when there comes a pause in it, still have their thoughts running upon unimportant, comparatively ignoble things. Those who are devoted to the Master seek always to hold a thought of that Master in the back of their mind, so that when there is a moment respite from worldly actions, at once that thought of him comes forwards and occupies the mind. At once the pupil thinks, what can I do to make my life like the Master's? How can I so improve myself that I can show forth the beauty of the Lord to those around me? What can I do to carry on his work of helping other people? One of the things we can all do is to send out helpful and sympathetic thoughts. And that's where you pray and you bless people. Remember also, the right thoughts must be defined and not scattered. Thoughts resting for a moment on one thing and then flying instantly to something else useless, and will not help us at all in learning to manage our thoughts. Right thought must never have the slightest touch of evil in it. There must be nothing doubtful about it. There are many people who would not deliberately think of anything impure or horrible, yet they will cherish thoughts which are on the brink of that. Not definitely evil, but certainly a little doubtful. In right thought there must be nothing like that. Wherever there is anything which seems a little least suspicious or unkind, it must be shouted out. We must be quite sure that all our thoughts are thoroughly kind and good. There is another meaning to a right thought, and that is correct thought, and we should think the truth only. So often we think untruly and wrongly of a person just because of prejudice or ignorance. And people have judged me that way since I was a little boy, even all the natives and everything. We get an idea that a certain person is a bad person, therefore that all that he does must be evil. We must attribute motives to him which are often absolutely without foundation. In doing so, we are thinking untruly of him, therefore our thoughts is not right thought. All men not yet adepts have in them something of evil as well as something as good. But most unfortunately, it is our custom to fix all our attention on evil and to forget all about the good. Never to look for it at all. That's why I say look for the light. Stop looking for the dark. Therefore our thoughts about these people is not right thought, not only because it is uncharitable, but because it is untrue. We are looking only at one side of the person and we ignore the other side. Furthermore, by fixing our attentions on the evil in the man instead of the good, we strengthen and encourage that evil. Whereas, by right thought, we might give just the same encouragement to the good side of the man's nature. That's what I try to do for people. The next stage is right speech. Here again we find just the same two divisions. First, we should speak always the good things. It is not our business to speak the evil deeds of others. In most cases, a story about other people which reach us are not true, so if we repeat them, our words also are untrue. We are doing harm to ourselves as well as to the person whom we speak. And even if the story is true, it is still wrong to repeat it, for we can do no good to a man by saying over and over again that he has done wrong. The kindest thing that we can do would be to say nothing about it. We should do that instinctively if the wrong things were done by a husband, a son, a brother. We should certainly feel that it would be wrong to advertise the misdeed of one whom we loved to many people who would not otherwise hear of it. But if there is any truth at all in our profession of universal brotherhood, we should realize that we have no right to circulate evil about a man, that we should speak with regard to others as we wish them to speak with regard to us. That's where it says, do unto others as you will have done to you. And I tell people that lots about the laws of the Bible and the universe and everything, and they just laugh at it. Yet again, we must remember that many people make their speech untrue because they allow themselves to fall into exaggeration and inaccuracy. They make little things into enormous stories. Assuredly, that is not right speech. Again, speech must be kindly, it must be direct and forceful, not silly. A large section of the world exists under delusion that it must make conversation. That is odd or rude, not to be perpetually babbling. The idea seems to be that when one meets a friend, one must keep talking all the time, or the friend will be hurt. Remember that when Christ was on the earth, he made a very strict statement that that for every idle word that a man should speak, he would have to account hereafter. The idle word is often a mischievous word, but quite apart from that, even the innocent idle word involves waste of time. If we must talk, at least we might say something useful or helpful. Some people, with the idea of seeming smart, keep up a stream of constant half-joking and sneering talk. A lot of people do that, and they're always laughing and doing things, and it's just crap. They must always be capping something that someone else had said. They must always be showing everything in their ridiculous or assuming aspect. Certainly all that comes under the heading of idle words. There is no doubt that it is seriously necessary that we should exercise exceeding care in the matter of right speech. With regard to right speech, he talks about read Ecclesiasticus, Ecclesiasticus. The next step in right action, we see once that there are 3 steps necessary, follow one another. If we think always good things, we shall certainly not speak the evil things, because we speak what is in our mind. And if our thoughts and speech are good, then the actions will follow also be good. Actions must be prompt and yet well considered. We all know some people who, when emergency arises, seem to become helpless. They putter about and do not know what to do. They get in the way of those who have their brains in better working order. Others plunge into the same rash actions without thinking at all. Learn to think quickly and act promptly, and yet always with consideration. Above all, always let actions be unselfish. Let it never be actuated in the least by personal consideration. That is very hard for most people, and yet is the power which must be acquired. We who try to live for the masters have many opportunities in our works to put that idea into practice. We must all think only what is best for the work, and we can do to help others. We must entirely put aside our personal considerations. We must not think what part in the works we shall like to bear, but we must try to do best that we possibly can with that part that is assigned to us. In those days, few people lived by themselves as monks or hermits used to do. We live among others so that whatever we think or say or do will necessarily affect a great many people. We should always bear in mind that our thoughts, our speech, and our actions are not merely qualities but powers given to us to use, for the use of which we are directly responsible. All are meant to be used for service, and to use them otherwise is to fail in our duty. We come now to the fifth step, right means of livelihood. That is a matter which we may touch quite a large number of us. The right means of livelihood is that which causes no harm to any living thing. We see at once that that would rule out such trades as thus butchers and fishermen. But the command reaches much further than that. We should not obtain our livelihood by harming any creature. Therefore, we see that once the selling of alcohol is not a right means of livelihood. The sellers of alcohol does not necessarily kill people, but he is unquestionably doing harm, and he is living on the harm that he does to people. So a lot of people who run bars and everything. The idea goes even further. That takes these cases of a merchant who, in the course of his trade, is dishonest. That is not a right means of livelihood because his trading is not fair and he is cheating people. If a merchant deals fairly by buying his articles wholesale, selling them retail as reasonable profit, that is a right means of livelihood, but the moment he begins to mislead people and sell a poor article for a good one, he is cheating them. The right means of livelihood may become a wrong means if it is treated in the wrong way. We must deal as honestly with people as we should wish them to deal with us. If a person is a trader in certain class of goods, he has special knowledge for those goods. The customer trusts himself in the hands of the trader because he himself has not the special knowledge. When you trust a doctor or a lawyer, you accept to be treated fairly. But it is exactly in the same way that the customer comes to the trader. Therefore, the latter should be as honest with the customer as the lawyer with the doctor is with the client or the patient. When a man trusts you in that way, he puts you on the honor to do your best for him. You have a right to make a reasonable profit in some course of your bargain, but you must also look at your duty. The sixth step is right exertion and right endeavor, and it is a very important one. We must not be content to be negatively good. It is desired of us is not merely absence of evil, but the positive doing of good. When the Lord Buddha made the wonderful short statement of his doctrine in a single verse, he began by saying, "Cease to do evil." But the next line runs, "Learn to do good." It is not enough to be passively good. There is so many well-meaning people, yet achieve nothing. Every person has a certain amount of strength, not only physical but mental. When he has a day's work before us, we know that we must reserve our strength for that. And therefore, before we begin it, we do not undertake something else which would so exhaust us as that the day work could not be done properly. Similarly, we have a certain amount of strength of mind and of will. We can perform only a certain amount of work on that level. Therefore, we must take care how we spend that power. There are other powers too. Every person has a certain amount of influence among his friends and relations. That influence means power. We are responsible for making good use of that power. All about us are children, relations, clerks, workmen, servants, and over all of these we have a certain amount of influence. At least by example, we must be careful what we do, what we say, because others will copy us. Right exertion means putting our work into the useful lines of not wasting it. There are many things that can be done, but some of them are immediate and more urgent than others. We must look about and see where our exertion would be most useful. It is not well that all should do the same thing. It is wiser that the work should be divided among us so that it may be perfectly rounded off and not left in the one-side condition. In all these matters, we must use our reason and common sense. Right memory or right remembrance is the seventh step. It means many things. The right memory of which Lord Buddha spoke has often been taken by his followers to mean the memory of past incarnations, which he himself possessed most fully. In one of the Jakara stories, a person spoke ill of him. He turned to his disciple and said, I have insulted this man in a previous life. Therefore he speaks ill of me now. I have no right to resent it. No doubt, if we remember everything that had happened to us before, we could arrange our present life better than we do. Most of us, however, have not the power of remembering our past lives, but we must not therefore think that the teaching as a right memory does not apply to us. First of all, it means self-recollectedness. It means that we must remember all the time who we are, what our work is, what is our duty, what we should be doing for the Master. Then again, right memory means the exercise of reasonable choice as to what we shall remember. To all of us in our lives there comes pleasant things and also things unpleasant. The wise person will take care to remember the good things, but he will let the evil die. Suppose someone comes to speak rudely to us. A foolish person will remember that for weeks, months, and years, and will continue to say that such and such a person spoke unkindly to him. It will rankle on his mind, but what good will that do him? Obviously none at all. It will only annoy him and keep him alive in the minds of an evil thought. That certainly is not right memory. We should immediately forgive the evil thing done to us, but we should always bear in mind the kindness which people have done us, because they will fill our minds with love and with gratitude. Again, we have all made many mistakes. It is well that we should remember them, in so far as not to repeat them, but otherwise to brood over them, to be always filling our minds with regret and with sorrow because of them. It is not right memory. The teachings giving above is the right memory has been well illustrated by S.E.G. And it says, like a poem here, let us forget the things that vexed and tried us, the worrying things that cause our soul to fret, the hope that cherished long were still denied us. Let us forget. Let us forget the little slights that pained us, the greater wrongs that rankle sometimes, yet the pride with which some lofty one disdained us. Let us forget. Let us forget our brother's faults and failings and the yielding of temptation that beset, that he, perchance, though grief by unveiling, cannot forget, but blessing manifold and past deservings, kind words and helpful deeds, and countless throng, the faults overcome, the rectitude unserving. Let us remember long the sacrifice of love and generous givings. When persons were few and handclasps warm and strong, the fragrance of each life of holy living let us remember long. Whatever things were good and true and gracious, whatever of right has triumphed over wrong, what love of God or man has rendered precious, let us remember long. And I got 6 pages and I'm going to do it. And then I'm finish this book. The last step is called right meditation and right concentration. This refers not only to set meditation, which we perform as part of our discipline, but it also means that all through our lives we should concentrate ourselves on the subject of doing good and being useful and helpful. In daily life we cannot always be meditating, because it is daily work that we must all do in the course of our ordinary lives, and yet I am not sure that this statement like that, made without reservation, is entirely true. We cannot always have our consciousness drawn away from the physical plane to higher levels, yet it is possible to live a life of meditation in this sense. that the higher things are always so strongly present in the background of our minds that, as I said when speaking about right thought, they may instantly come to the front when the mind is not otherwise occupied. Our life will then be really a life of perpetual meditation upon the highest and noblest objects, interrupted now and then by the necessity of putting our thoughts into the practice of daily life. Such a habit of thought will influence us in more ways than we see at the first glance. Like always attracts like. Two people who adopt such a line of thought will presently be drawn together, will feel an attraction one for the other, and so it may well be that in time a nucleus of those who habitually hold a higher thought will be gathered together, will gradually develop perhaps into theosophic lodges. At any rate, they will draw together. Their thoughts will react upon one another. In that way, each will greatly help an advancement of the rest. Again, wherever we go, we are surrounded by invisible hosts, angels, nature spirits, men who have laid aside their physical bodies. The condition of right concentration will attract to us all the best of those various orders of being, so that wherever we go, we shall be surrounded by good and holy influences. This is the teaching of Lord Buddha as he gave it in the first sermon. It is upon his teachings that the worldwide kingdom of righteousness is found. The royal chariot wheel of which he sets in motion for the first time on the Asala Festival so many centuries ago, when in the far future the time shall come for the advent of another Buddha, the present of the Bodhisattvas take the final incarnation in which the great step will be achieved. He will preach the divine law to the world in whatever form may seem to him most suitable to the requirement of the error, and then will follow him in his high office, the Master Kuthumi, who has transferred himself to the second ray to take the responsibilities of becoming the Bodhisattva of the sixth root race, and that's going on now. So I'll read these last few pages and I'm done. Chapter 15, The Power in the Triangles. The Lord of the world is governed by spiritual king, one Lord of the flame who came long ago from Venus. He is called by the Hindus Sanat Kumra, the last word being the title meaning prince or ruler. Other names given to him are the one initiator, the one without a second, the eternal youth of 16 summers, and often we speak of him as the Lord of the world. He is the supreme ruler. He is in his hand, and within his actual aura lies the whole of his planet. He represents the Logos far as the world is concerned and directs the whole of its evolution. Not that humanity alone, but also the evolution of the Devas, nature spirits, all other creatures connected with the earth. He is, of course, entirely distinct from the great entity called the Spirit of the Earth, who uses our world as a physical body. In his mind, he holds the whole plane of evolution at some high level of which he knows nothing. He is the force which drives the whole world machine and embodies the divine will on the planet, the strength, the courage, decision, perseverance, and all similar characteristics. When they show themselves down here in the lives of men, are reflections from him. His consciousness is of an extended and nature that it comprehends at once all the life on our globe. In his hands are the power of cyclical destruction, for he wields Fohat in its higher forms and can deal directly with cosmic forces outside our chain. His work is probably usually connected with humanity and mass rather than individuals, but when he does influence any single person, we are told that it is through the Atma, that not through the ego, that his influence is brought to bear. At a certain point in the progress of the aspirant on the path, he is formally presented as the Lord of the world. Those who have thus met him face to face speak of him as an appearance of handsome youth, dignified, dignant, beyond all description, yet with a mien of omniscient, inscrutable majesty, conveying such a sense of restless power or resistless power that some have found themselves unable to bear his gaze, have veiled their faces in awe. Thus, for example, did our great founder, Madame Blavatsky. One who has had this experience can never forget it, nor can he ever therefore doubt that, however terrible a sin or sorrow on the earth may be, all things are somewhat working together for the eventual good of all. Humanity is being steadily guided towards its final goal. During each world period, we are told there are three successive lords of the world. The present holder, the office is already the third. He resides with his three pupils in an oasis of the Gobi Desert called Shambhala, often spoken as a sacred island, in remembrance of the time when it was an island in the Central Asia Sea. These four greatest of the adepts are often called the children of the fire mist, since they belong to the evolution different from ours. Their bodies, though human in appearance, differ widely from ours in constitution, being rather garments assumed for convenience than bodies in the ordinary sense, since they are artificial and their particles do not change as do those of human frame. They require no nourishment and remain unchanged through thousands of years. The three pupils who stand at the level of the Buddha are called Pratyeka, Pratyeka, or Pakshika, Pachcheka. Buddhas assist the Lord in his work, are themselves destined to be our three lords of the world when humanity is occupying the planet Mercury. Once in every 7 years, the lords of the world conduct the Shambhala, a great ceremony somewhat similar to Wesak event, but on still grander scales of different types, when all adepts and even some initiates below the grade are invited and have thus the opportunity to come in touch with their great leaders. At other times, he deals only with the heads of the official hierarchy, except when for special reason he summons others to his presence. The exalted position of the spiritual king, as being described, the secret doctrines, it is there stated that as the ages pass, the great steps which we now recognize as leading to perfection will remain unchanged as to their relative position. Though the system of things as a whole is moving upwards, and thus the actual attainment, which in the remote future will mark a particular step, will be far fuller than they are at present. The perfect man of the seventh round, this is the silent correction of the mistakes of the secret doctrines, where Blavatsky had written root race instead of round. Of our chain will be, it is said, but one removed from the root race or root base of their hierarchy, the highest on the earth of the terrestrial change. That is today to say the king stands even now one stage beyond the point to which only age of evolution will bring the perfected man of our humanity. Ages that must run into millions of years, taking us through 2.5 rounds of varied experiences. This wondrous being came during the third root race period to take charge of the earth's evolution. That coming of the world future king is thus described in man, hence, how and whither. The great Lemurian polar star was still perfect, the huge crescent still stretched along the equator, including Madagascar, the sea which occupied what is now the Gobi Desert, still broke against the rocky barriers of the northern Himalaya slopes, and all was being prepared the most dramatic moment in history of the earth, the coming of the Lord of the Flame. The lords of the moon and the Manu and the third race, have done all that was possible to bring man upon that point at which the germ of mind could be quickened and the descent of the ego could be made. All the loggers had been pushed on. There were no more in the animal ranks capable of raising into man. The door against future immigrations into the human kingdom from the animal was shut only when no more were in sight, nor would be capable of reaching it without a repetition of the tremendous impulse given only once in the evolution of the scheme at this midmost point. The great astrological event, when a very special conclave of planets occurred and magnetic conditions of the earth was the most favorable possible, was chosen as the time. It was about 6.5 million years ago. Nothing more remained to be done, save what only they could do. Then, with mighty roar and swift descent from incalculable heights, surrounded by blazing masses of fire, which filled the sky with shooting tongues of flame, flashed through the aerial space the chariots of the sons of fire, the lords of the flame from Venus. It halted, hovering over the white island, which lay smiling in the bosom of the great Gobi Desert, or Gobi Sea. Green was it and radiant in masses of fragments, many-colored blossoms, Earth's offering her best and fairest to welcome her coming king. There he stood, the youth of 16 summers, Sanat Kumara, the eternal virgin youth, the new ruler of earth come to his kingdom, his pupil, his 3 Kumaras. With him, his helpers around him, 30 mighty beings were there, great beyond earth's reckoning, though in regard and order, clothed in glorious bodies. They had created the Kriyashakti, the first occult hierarchy branch, the one spread, the Banya tree, the nursery of future adepts, the centers of all occult life. Their dwelling place was and is imperishable sacred land on which every shines down the blazing star, the symbol of Earth's monarch, the changeless poles around which the life of our Earth is ever spinning. Madame Blavatsky says in The Secret Doctrines, the being just referred to who has to remain nameless is the tree from which, in subsequent age, all the great historical known sages and hierophants such as Rishi Kapila, Hermes, Enoch, Orpheus, etc., have branched off. As objective men, he is the mystery to the profane, the ever invisible, yet ever present personage to whom legends are rife in the East, especially among the occultists, the students of sacred science. It is he who changed form, yet remains ever the same. It is he again who holds spiritual sway over the initiate adepts throughout the whole world. He is, as said the Nameless One, who has many names and yet whose name and whose very nature is unknown. He is the initiator called the Great Sacrifice, for sitting at the threshold of light, he looks into it from within the circle of darkness, which he will not cross, not will. He quit his post till the last day of his life cycle. By does the solitary watcher remains at his self-chosen post. Why does he sit by the fountain of primal wisdom, of which he drinks no longer? For he has naught to learn which he does not know, neither on the earth nor in the heavens, because the lonely sore-foot pilgrims on the journey back to their homes are never sure, to the last moment, of not losing their way. In this limitless desert of illusion and matter called earth life, because he would fain show the way to the regions of freedom and light, from which he is a voluntary exile himself, to every prisoner who has succeeded in liberating himself from the bonds of flesh and illusion, because in short he has sacrificed himself for the sake of mankind, though but a few elect may profit by the great sacrifice. It is under the direct silent guidance of the Mahaguru, that all the other less divine teachers, instructors of mankind became. From the first awakening of human consciousness, the guides of early humanity, it is through these sons of God that infinite humanity learned its first notion of all arts and science as well as the spiritual knowledge. It is they who laid the first foundation stone of those ancient civilizations that so sorely puzzle our modern generations of students and scholars. The highest initiation, it is the first ray that the greatest progress of man is possible within the hierarchy of the globe, for there are on two initiates beyond that of Manu and the Pachcheka Buddhas, who stand next above to the Manu, have been strongly misunderstood by some writers who have described them as selfless men who refuse to teach what they have learnt and passed away into nirvana. It is true that these Buddhas do not teach, for they have the other work of their own rays to do. The true also that time comes when they will leave the world, but only to carry on their glorious work elsewhere. The next step, the initiation that none can give, but each must take for himself, puts the adept on the level of the Lord of the world, an office which is held first for a short period of the first and second lords on one world, and when that has achieved for a longer responsibility, the third upon some other. The task of the third lord of the world is far greater than those of the first and second lords, because it is his duty to round off satisfactorily the period of evolution and to deliver over the countless millions of evolving creatures into the hands of the seed Manu, who will be responsible for them during the interplanetary nirvana, and will hand them over in turn to the root Manu of the next globe. The third lord of the world, having fulfilled his duty, takes another initiation entirely outside our world and the hierarchy, and attains a level of silent watcher. In that capacity he remains on guard for the whole period of that round. It is only when the life wave has again occupied our planet and is again ready to leave it that he abandons his strange self-imposed task and hands over to his successor. The goal for all, far above us, is all the splendor of these great heights at present. It is worth our while to lift our thoughts towards them and try to realize them a little. They show the goal before every one of us, that clearer our sight of it, the swifter and steadier will be our progress towards it. Though we may not all hope to fulfill the ancient ideal of this and fly as an arrow to the mark. In the course of great progress, every man will someday reach full consciousness on the heights of our planes, the divine plane, and be conscious simultaneously at all levels of the Prakrit cosmic plane, so that having in himself the power of the highest, he shall yet be able to comprehend and function on very lowest and help where help is needed. The omnipotence, the omnipresence surely waits every one of us. And though this lower life may not be worth living for anything that we may gain from it ourselves, yet it is magnificently worth enduring as a necessary stage for the true life that lies before us. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, nor hath it entered into the hearts of man to conceive the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. For the love of God, the wisdom of God, the power of God, the glory of God passes all understandings, even as does his peace. Finish.